there. This is the east coast of Greenland. And I'm going to whiz through a few slides now because this is just going to give you a feel of the Arctic and take on a little sort of, armchair holiday there, if you like. This is the Nansen Strait, and that's all the pack ice sweeping down towards the southern tip of Greenland. And my friend took that picture of me the first time I went to Greenland, and I remember being absolutely awe-inspired by it. Most of the ice you see in these pictures may well be gone in 40 or 50 years' time. Fridtjof Nansen, this is the guy I told you about earlier, or rather I alluded to him earlier. Dave and I, my friend Dave, decided to sort of to copy his or follow in his footsteps and make this first British crossing of Greenland following Nansen's footsteps. And it was an absolutely wonderful thing. It's the time I told you about where I got a bit hungry and was going to eat fish on the beach and all that sort of thing. So this man was a doctor as well as being an explorer in the true sense of the word. He did an awful lot for repatriating Russian refugees after the First World War. He was a humanitarian as well as an explorer and a doctor. Wonderful, incredible man. That was a picture from his book. And that shows a little mountain called Keatak Mountain on the east coast of Greenland. And Dave and I had studied his book before we went, and we kind of imprinted these memories of these little areas in Greenland. And when we arrived, it was very emotional to actually see that mountain and kick off on the journey. And that's our tent there. And we headed off across the ice. It took us, as I say, about 2 months. Every morning I'd get up and clean the tent. That was pretty much the view I'd have of the tent every morning. Dave was what we call the inside man, and I was the outside man. So my job was to get up, usually about -28. That was actually not desperately cold for the Arctic, I have to tell you. And you clean all the snow off the tent, get the sledges ready to go again and everything else. The Greenland ice cap is the most amazing place. It looks a bit like a desert, but it was an absolutely astounding spiritual experience to cross it. I just can't explain it. Sadly, I won't be going back to do anything like that again because I can't face the idea of flying when I'm telling everyone else or suggesting to everyone else politely they don't. But it was a wonderful experience, I must say. But on a more sort of sobering note, recently I was talking to a friend of mine, a chap called Bill Mockridge, who lives just down the road from me in Wales. He's a scientist, and unlike me, I'm a sort of tree surgeon and a few GCSE O levels, and that's it. He's a very, very technical, highly qualified scientist. He's worked for BAS, and he's currently come back from a spell in the Arctic, working on the Greenland ice cap, looking at all these melt pools that are happening on the Greenland ice cap. And he was chatting away, pouring a cup of coffee for me, and we were talking about all sorts of things. Then we got onto the subject of Greenland and the ice and everything else. And he said, I just can't believe how fast that ice cap is melting at the moment, because he's actually working with these pools. And you've probably heard, all of you, how they're going down into the ice and almost lubricating the glaciers. So whereas the glaciers were jammed, now they've got this lubricant underneath and they're going even faster. So I said, well, the Greenland ice cap melts, that means that the sea level's going to rise. That's going to be a real problem, isn't it? He said, well, yeah, it is, in this one matter-of-fact way that scientists talk. He said, well, it is a problem. He said, people move away from the coast. So he said, that's not the real problem. So, well, what is the real problem? He said, well, the real problem will be when all that fresh water cascades into the ocean and stops the Atlantic conveyor. And I said, well, why is that a problem? He said, well, in the first year of that happening, 50% of the UK will die. And I thought, well, that sounds a bit dramatic. But he was absolutely, he worked with this stuff. He kind of knows in a scientific way the cause and effect. And I thought to myself about that. And later I read an article in a newspaper that told me that last winter, although it was one of the warmest winters on record, apparently, about 23,000 people died of cold. Now, that was probably one of the warmest winters on record. I then went on to read that the reason they died of cold was most of them were old and most of them couldn't afford their heating. So you start to scratch a bit deeper, and you start to see a few more reasons for this. And so then, when he tells me that 50% of the UK will be dead, if that happened, you're talking about plunging the UK into Siberian weather, where ice blizzards would just rip down power lines. And recently, this year, there was Lincolnshire somewhere, there's about 4 or 5, or how many people without electricity. If you rely as an old person on electricity for your heating, you've got a few weeks of it having no heating, you probably would die, quite frankly, and you couldn't move outside your house. But this Siberian stuff will be massively worse than that, massively worse. My feelings have changed over the last year an awful lot. Now I tend to look at everything I see and always come down to one bottom line problem, regardless. It's a problem that when you talk to people, as I do quite often, this is the first time I've addressed a group of people like this. It's usually schools or WIs or universities or mountaineering clubs and that sort of thing. The problem I come across is a kind of reluctance to engage with the real problem. And that is really, I think, because most people have what's known as a comfort zone. And they perceive a new future, if you like, or a change in future as being an erosion of their comfort zone. They think it's going to be something uncomfortable, unpleasant, hair shirt, back to living in yurts, whatever they think. But my view of this, personally, is that I think there is only one answer to me. It always comes down to what I said at the beginning when I started talking to you, that this idea of an economy is more important than the planet. It isn't, quite frankly. And I think that I'm not sure I understand everything that the socialist movement talks about, and I'm sure, in fact I know that a lot of you here are way more informed than I am on that matter. But what I'm utterly convinced about is our present system has reached the end of its safe, useful life. And I think a change has to happen. It has to be a worldwide change, and it has to be the end of the system that we currently think is the only.
I would like to thank Glenn Morris on behalf of the Socialist Party on providing such an excellent presentation. Brian is now going to continue with his presentation. What he's got lined up for us, I've got no idea whatsoever, other than I know that it will be the Socialist Party's position in regards to society in general, and particularly with the subject matter that we're looking at this afternoon, and that is climate change. While Brian is setting up his equipment, I'm going to pass around the mail-in meeting list for those people that haven't already got their names down. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks a lot, Brian. I suppose my first thought is, how do I follow that? The last presentation I enjoyed immensely, Glenn. Trekking across icy wastes, encounters with grizzly bears, eating rotten fish. I just feel I'm going to disappoint by comparison with that last presentation. However, I was thinking while Glenn was speaking, I came down from Glasgow last night on the sleeper, and there was a few drunken Glaswegians there, a few bear encounters there, maybe not grizzlies. And I did eat from the train buffet, and I think it was probably rotten fish that I had. And we were looking for scenes of desolation and emptiness. 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning at Euston Station takes the biscuit. But that's my attempt to sort of try and compete, as it were, with a hugely impressive presentation, as far as I was concerned. Very useful from my point of view. There's a lot of things that Glenn said there that I'm going to tie in with. I'd like to say it because we worked very closely together and had a lot of communication on the two talks. It didn't, I think it's more just by happy accident. There's a lot of very interesting things that Glenn's raised the question on, and I'm going to hopefully elaborate on over the next 40 minutes or so. So, here's what I'm going to touch on. First of all, how does capitalism account for the environment? I hope some of you at the back can, all of you at the back can read this font size. How does capitalism account for the environment?